There is a diesel engine in a milkhouse in Holmes County, Ohio, that has been running since 1951. One cylinder. It turns a line shaft, it pumps the water, it cools the milk. 73 years. It has never been rebuilt. The man who owns it now was not yet born when his grandfather first started it. And when I asked him what the secret was, he did not say good steel, and he did not say luck. He walked me over to a shelf above the workbench, and he handed me a small brown bottle, and he said, "1 capful, every time we change the oil, that is all." That bottle costs about $1 a dose. The liquid inside it is the reason that engine will likely outlive the man who runs it now, the same way it outlived the 2 men before him. And here is the part that should bother you. That same liquid used to be in every quart of oil sold in this country, all of it. Then, quietly, between the early 2000s and 2010, it was taken out. Not by accident, on purpose, by the people who write the rules, and almost no one told you. After my last video on the sand and the wire, dozens of you wrote the same thing. You said, "Amos, my father's truck ran 300,000 miles and never complained, and my new one was tired at 90. What changed?" And you were not imagining it. Something did change. It is not in the metal. It is in the oil. So I went looking, the way I always do, and what I found I am going to lay out for you plain. Before this video is over, I am going to show you a paper written in 2004 by a professor in London that explains exactly how this works, down to the chemistry, on the very same year they finished pulling it out of your oil. I am going to give you the name. I am going to give you the number in parts per million that they cut it down to. And I am going to tell you the one reason they did it, which has nothing to do with your engine and everything to do with a part bolted under your car. Stay with me. This one is going to make some mechanics very uncomfortable. Let me give you the number first, because the number is the whole story. The liquid is zinc. The proper name is a mouthful zinc dialkyl dithiophosphate. And nobody says that, so everyone in the trade just calls it zinc, or by its initials ZDDP. It is measured by the phosphorus it carries in parts per million. And here is the history of that number, which is the history of the modern engine. In the early 1990s, the oil on the shelf at any store carried about 1,200 to 1,400 parts per million of this zinc. That was normal. That was what your father's truck drank every 3,000 miles. In 1995, they trimmed it a little. Then in 2004, they cut it hard, down to 800 parts per million. And in 2010, they locked it there. 800. Some oils now carry even less. So sit with that. The oil you buy today for your everyday car carries little more than half the zinc your father's oil carried. In one generation, they cut the single most important wear protection in your engine nearly in half. And they did it without one word on the front of the bottle. The bottle still says it protects your engine. It does not say against what, or how much less than it used to. Now think about that for a second. Why would the zinc matter so much? What does it actually do in there, sloshing around in the dark? This is where you have to understand one thing about how an engine survives, and it is not what most people think. Most people think the oil is what keeps the metal apart. A slippery film, a cushion, and the parts float on it and never touch. And most of the time that is true. But not all of the time. There are places inside your engine where the pressure is so brutal, so concentrated, that the oil film gets squeezed down to almost nothing. The camshaft pushing on the lifter. The piston ring scraping the wall. Every cold morning, the first few seconds after you turn the key, before the oil has even reached the top of the engine. In those moments, the metal is nearly touching metal. Steel against steel, under thousands of pounds of pressure, with the oil squeezed out from between them. The engineers have a name for this. They call it boundary lubrication. It means you are at the boundary, the edge, where the oil alone is no longer enough. And in that instant, something has to stand between the two pieces of steel, or they weld and tear just a little every single time. A microscopic scratch, then another. Multiply that by every cold start, every hard pull for 10 years, and that is not a scratch anymore. That is a worn-out engine. So what stands in the gap? The zinc. Here is the beautiful part, and I want you to really hear it because this is real chemistry, not a story I am telling you. When that zinc meets hot, stressed steel, it reacts with it. It does not just coat the metal. It chemically grows a film on the surface, a hard, glassy layer, microscopically thin, made of zinc and phosphorus. And that film is sacrificial. When the pressure comes down and the metal would have scraped, the film shears instead. The film takes the damage so the steel does not. And then, here is the genius of it, the film rebuilds itself, out of more zinc in the oil, as fast as it wears away. A self-healing skin of glass over your most punished metal, replacing itself every minute the engine runs. That is what $1's worth of zinc does. It is not a lubricant. It is armor, the kind that repairs itself. The Amish did not invent this, and neither did I. The chemists found it in the 1930s. But the principle, the idea that you lay down something soft and cheap to be destroyed, so the precious thing underneath is spared, that is as old as the trade itself. My grandfather greased a wagon hub with the same logic. You feed the cheap thing to the wear so the dear thing lives. Now let me take you back, because this knowledge has a lineage, and the lineage matters. That single-cylinder diesel in the milkhouse, the one from 1951. When it was new, every oil you could buy was thick with zinc. The men who ran those engines never thought about it, the way you never think about the air. It was simply in there. The heavy straight-weight oils, the kind that poured slow as molasses in the cold, were loaded with it. And those engines ran and ran and ran, and the families that owned them learned a quiet expectation. A good engine was not something you replaced. It was something you maintained, and it outlived you, and you handed it down with the farm. I am Amish, and I will be honest with you about what is and is not ours. We did not discover this chemistry, but we kept the habit longer than the world did, because we never went chasing the new bottle every time the label changed. My people run diesel engines for stationary power, for the pumps and the compressors and the cooling, because the old order permits the engine where it does not permit the car. And an engine that has to run a farm cannot be a throwaway thing. So the old men learned which oil still had the zinc in it, and they kept using it, and they added it back when the stores stopped carrying it. They did not read the chemistry papers. They just noticed, the way a farmer notices, that the new oil let the engines wear and the old way did not. Waste nothing. Make the machine outlive you. That rule did not change, just because the men in the city changed the recipe. Before the Amish, before the diesel, the same idea ran much deeper into history. The ancients packed the axles of their carts with animal fat and ground bone and sulfur without knowing the word for it. But they were doing the same thing, laying down a soft sacrifice between two hard surfaces. The principle was never a secret. The chemistry was simply the modern, precise version of a very, very old piece of common sense. And in the 1930s, when they finally bottled that precise version and called it zinc dialkyl-dithiaphosphate, it should have been the end of the worn-out engine forever. It was not, and here is where it gets uncomfortable. Because to understand why they took it back out, you have to look not at your engine, but at one part bolted to the underside of your car, and at the rules written to protect that part instead of you. Now think about that part, the catalytic converter. It is a steel canister in your exhaust, and inside it is a honeycomb coated with precious metals, platinum, palladium, rhodium, metals worth more by the ounce than gold. Its only job is to clean the exhaust before it leaves the pipe. And here is the cruel little fact at the center of this whole story. The very same zinc that protects your engine is poison to that converter. It is the same property that makes it work. The zinc loves to stick to hot metal surfaces. That is exactly why it plates itself onto your camshaft and saves it. But a little of that phosphorus rides out with the exhaust, and it sticks to the precious metals in the converter the same way, and it smothers them. It blinds the catalyst. Over many years and many miles, a converter breathing zinc slowly loses its ability to clean the air. The engineers call it poisoning, and that is the right word. So now you can see the fork in the road and you can see which way they went. By the early 2000s, the government had put a warranty rule on that converter. The makers were made responsible for it lasting a long time, 8 years, 80,000 miles on the federal rule, longer in some states. The converter had to survive. That was the law. The camshaft had no such law. No one ever wrote a rule that your engine had to last 80,000 miles, because they assumed it always would. And so a decision was made in committee rooms by the bodies that set the oil standards, the ones with the initials, the A, P, I, and the others. They looked at the two pieces of metal, the converter that the law protected and the camshaft that the law ignored, and they chose. They cut the zinc down to 800 parts per million in 2004. They protected the part the government was watching, and they let the part the government ignored begin to wear. They did not lie to you. They simply did not tell you. The bottle still said it protected your engine. It just protected it less, so that the converter could live longer, so that the manufacturer would not have to honor a warranty. And here is the part that should make you angry. The people most hurt by this were not the new cars. The new cars had roller lifters, a different design that needs less zinc. The cars destroyed by this were the old ones, the classics. The trucks built before the change with what they call flat tappet camshafts, the kind that need that zinc the most. Their owners kept buying oil off the same shelf, the same brand, trusting the same label, and their camshafts began to fail. Cams going flat. Lifters chewing themselves to metal dust. A wave of it, starting in the early 2000s, in engines that had run faithfully for 30 years. The men who restored those cars could not understand it at first. They had done nothing different. The oil had changed underneath them, silently, and no one had said a word. So they figured it out slowly in the back of the magazines and the corners of the forums. They learned the number. They learned which oils still carried the zinc, and they started quietly adding it back. That brown bottle on the shelf above the workbench, $1 a dose. Now if you own an old engine, a classic car, a farm tractor, a generator, a mower, an air-cooled motor, any flat tappet engine built before the change, and you are thinking this is the most important thing you have heard all year, stay with me, because this next part is exactly how you put it right. Here is the build, and it is almost insultingly simple, which is why they could bury it in plain sight. You have two ways to put the zinc back, and you can use either one. The first way is the additive. It is a small bottle of zinc concentrate, the same ZDDP, sold by several makers under names with zinc right in them. You pour the recommended amount into your fresh oil at every oil change. One bottle treats several changes. The cost works out to roughly $1, sometimes $2 for each change. That is the whole expense. $1 against an engine. The second way needs no extra bottle at all. You simply buy the oil that still has the zinc in it. Heavy-duty diesel oil, the kind sold for big trucks, has historically carried far more zinc than the everyday passenger oil, because diesel engines were never bound by the same converter rules in the same way. A common 1540 diesel oil has long been the quiet favorite of men who keep old engines alive, for exactly this reason. And break-in oil, the special oil you run in a freshly rebuilt engine for the first few hundred miles, is deliberately loaded with zinc, because that is when the metal is rawest and the protection matters most. The makers know precisely how important the zinc is. They put it back in for the one moment they cannot afford failure. That tells you everything. So the recipe is this. If your engine is old, flat tappet, air-cooled, a tractor, a generator, a classic, then at every oil change you either add 1 dose of the zinc concentrate or you run a high-zinc diesel oil to begin with. You do this with fresh oil on schedule, never as an excuse to skip a change. You especially do it on a freshly rebuilt or new-to-you-old engine where the break-in is everything. That is the entire technique. There is no special tool. There is no permission to ask. There is a brown bottle and a capful, and the knowledge of why. And the why is the part they could not bottle, Because a man who knows why the zinc matters will never be talked out of it. A man who only follows the label will buy whatever the label now says. Now, I told you at the start I had saved something for the end, and I keep my word. In 2004, the very same year they finished cutting the zinc down to 800 parts per million, a professor in London named Hugh Spikes published a paper. It is called, simply, The History and Mechanisms of ZDDP. It ran to 20 pages in a journal called Tribology Letters, which is the science of friction and wear, a field most people do not even know has a name. And in that paper he laid out in full with the chemistry exactly what I have told you tonight. How the zinc reacts with the steel, how it grows that self-healing glass film, how it sacrifices itself to save the metal, how, in his own words, it had been protecting engines since the late 1930s. Think about the timing of that. In the same year that the committees were finishing the job of pulling this protection out of your oil, the best science in the world was publishing, in plain academic print, exactly how essential it was and exactly how it worked. The knowledge was not hidden. It was never hidden. It sat in a journal, free to read, written by one of the foremost men in the field. It is just that no one put it on the front of the bottle. No one ran an advertisement that said, by the way, we are taking out the thing that saves your camshaft, to protect a part you will never see, to honor a warranty you never read. The paper told the truth. The label told you nothing, and most men only ever read the label. That is the whole of it. The knowledge was not lost. It was set down gently where you would not look, while the recipe was quietly changed, so that one part could live and another could wear, and so that you would buy more engines. It was not a grand conspiracy with men in a dark room. It was simpler and colder than that. It was a rule that protected the converter and ignored the camshaft, and an industry that did exactly, precisely what the rule rewarded, and not 1 inch more. Now let me be honest with you the whole way, the way I always am, because the breathless videos will not be. This zinc is not magic, and I will not let you believe that it is. It protects against wear. That is all it does. It will not save an engine you run dry of oil. It will not save an engine you let cook to death because the coolant was low. It will not forgive you for never changing the oil at all, and in fact, dirty old oil with zinc in it is far worse than clean new oil. The zinc protects the metal from rubbing. It does nothing against heat, against neglect, against grit, against time itself. An engine still needs its oil changed. It still needs to stay cool. It still needs the air filter clean. The zinc only wins the one battle it fights, the battle at the boundary, where steel nearly touches steel. But that one battle happens to be the one that quietly kills more engines than any other, and that is why it matters as much as it does. And one more honest word, the most important one. If you have a modern car with a modern roller engine and a healthy catalytic converter, do not go pouring extra zinc into it by the bottle. That advice is not for you. For you, too much zinc really can shorten the life of that converter exactly as they warned, and your engine was built not to need it. This knowledge is for the old engines, the flat tappet ones, the classics, the tractors, the generators, the air-cooled motors, the freshly rebuilt blocks during break-in, the engines from before the change and the engines built like them. For those, the zinc is not optional. It is the difference between an engine that wears out and an engine that, like the one in that milkhouse, simply refuses to die. Match the cure to the engine. That is the honest rule, and the men selling miracles will never tell it to you. So there it is, the dollar liquid, not banned exactly, no. Quietly cut, quietly halved, quietly left out, while the label stayed the same and the reason was never spoken aloud. You were not given this. Now you have it. If you are the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do. And I want to hear from you. In the comments, tell me the engine you are trying to keep alive. The make, the year, the machine. The tractor your father bought, the truck you will not give up, the generator that has to start every winter. Tell me what it is and I will tell you whether the zinc is for it. I read every single one. Subscribe and stay close, because next time I am going to show you the one thing the old men did to their fuel before they ever started a cold engine in January. That meant it turned over on the first pull when every modern machine on the road refused to. It costs almost nothing, and there is a reason you have never been told about it either. So check your oil, read the back of the bottle, not the front, and remember, the people who built this country with their hands knew things we are only just starting to remember.